Okay, welcome everyone. This is the third night, I believe, of this series, a wonderful series, a bunch of different teachers from Bet Torah, rabbinical staff. So please continue to join us throughout until Rosh Hashanah, a different teacher every night. I believe the next teacher is going to be Rabbi Tobias. So for tonight's class, I chose a topic for me. When we say preparing for Yamim Noraim, I think of a specific topic when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, and that is looking at Rosh Hashanah for the 30 minutes we have tonight from the Torah up until today. Now, obviously we can't go through every detail, but I would like for us to explore tonight, what does Rosh Hashanah look like in the Tanakh, Mishnah, Gemara, Halacha, whatever we can look at from Rosh Hashanah in that aspect to give us a better understanding as to the nature of Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so I titled this class Rosh Hashanah from Tanakh till today. And let's start with the Torah. Many of you are familiar with this passage, with this part of the Torah. I'll make my screen a little bit bigger. It says in the Torah, in Perek Kav Gimel, in Parashat Emor, right? V'daber Adonai Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael lemor. B'chodesh HaShevi'i, in the 7th month, be'ehad lachodesh yelachem Shabbaton, zichron teruah mikra kodesh. The Torah says that this day, the first day of the 7th month, shall be known, right? It should be for you a Shabbaton, a rest. Zichron teruah mikra kodesh. Okay, we know this idea of zichron teruah. Right? What does this mean, zichron teruah? A remembrance of a teruah. Right? A teruah, we know. I've been practicing. Thank you, Soli Haber, for that. Practicing my shofar blows. Right? Teruah. I've been hearing a lot of teruah over the past few days. But what does this mean, zichron teruah? Right? Many of you know. Anyone want to say? You can unmute yourself. Many of you know the name of Rosh Hashanah as not Zichron Teruah, but no one.
Yom Teruah.
Right, Yom Teruah. Many of you know Yom Teruah, which is important to think about Yom Teruah versus Zichron Teruah, because in the next part of the Torah, right, that we hear about Rosh Hashanah, says in Bemidbar Perek Kaftet, ובחודש השביעי באחד לחודש מקרא קודש יהיה לכם, right? כל מלאכת עבודה לא תעשו, יום תרועה יהיה לכם. This is a day of teruah. A day of teruah, a day of a teruah. Now, what does teruah mean? So teruah, from the way that we know, is talking about a shofar, right? Where do we know this idea from? Many of us learned Yom Teruah, Teruah is a shofar blow, a certain shofar blow that is blasted. Where do we know that from? So we know that from, and this is important, and we'll come back to these two sources in a moment, in Bemidbar chapter 10. In Bemidbar chapter 10, we hear about the trumpets that were used in the desert. The Sheteh HaSoserot Kesef. And we know that they were used for different purposes in the Midbar. And we hear about two types of uses for the Hasoserot. One is the Teki'ah and one is the Teruah. And I need you to think of the following question. Why is Rosh Hashanah called Yom Teruah and not Yom Teki'ah? It's an important question to ask. Maybe you never asked yourself this question. Maybe you've asked this question before. But again, if you think about it, when we blow the shofar, we do teki'ah, and we do either shevarim or teruah, which is the teruah. Right? Why is this not Yom Teki'ah? So very good, June. I see you wrote battle cry. Excellent. Good. Yeriho. So June, let's add to this more than that. Look here at the pasuk in front of you. It says, when do you blow the Hasoserot? When do you blow the Teruah and when do you blow the tikiyah? So the tikiyah was blown when we gathered people. Okay, when people were gathered, right? The nesi'im were gathered, right? It says over here, "V'take'u bahen v'no'adu elecha kol ha'eda el petach ol moed." If you did the tikiyah, you're gathering people, either the eda or the chieftains, the nesi'im. What happens when you blew a teruah? That is when you either traveled, right? That's when the camp traveled, and the camp was traveling towards its destination. But when do you generally travel? A battle. When you go to battle, al hasar hasoretchem, bahare otem bahasosero. Then you blow the teruah in the hasoserot. What's the next word? This is the key word over here. Venizkartem lifne Adonai Elohechem. When you blow the shofar or the hasoserot here, like you said, the battle cry. But here we're talking about a little bit of a different battle usage of teruah for a moment. You're blowing it to announce that a war is coming. You're entering into war. And what's going to happen? What's the purpose? Venizkartem lifne Adonai Elohechem. You will be remembered in front of God. Think of the spiritual aspect of that. It's not just practical. We're going to war. Here's the blow. We're going to war. It's more than that. You will be remembered in front of God when you do that. Right? Many times we have dual purposes. We have the practical here. You have also the spiritual reason for it, right? You have a reason here of you'll be remembered in front of God, right? And let's add to that the next pasuk. And we say this pasuk, and I'm going to use the tune of the high holidays to prepare us for the high holidays. I'm not going to read this pasuk in the ta'amim of the Torah. Rather, what we say, "Ubyom simchatchem moadechem, ubrashe chodshechem, utkatem hasoserot al olotechem ve'al simchei shalmechem, ve'ayu lachem zikaron lifnei Elohechem, ani Adonai Elohechem." This is the pasuk that we keep repeating on Rosh Hashanah, right? We use this pasuk because we're saying that on your happy occasions and on your Rashi Chodashim, you blow the hasosot, the trumpets, on your korbanot, ve'hayu lachem lezikaron lifnei Elohechem, right? And they shall be for you a reminder in front of God. Here's the word zikaron again, right? We will be, or they will be the korbanot. And before we spoke about, you will be remembered in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have this idea of zikaron. You have this idea of zikaron. You are remembered. So now let's go back to the concept of zichron teruah, Yom Teruah and zichron teruah. Now what does it mean? Now what are we talking about? If we use the context of these Pesukim, what is Zichron Teruah? It's a blow through which you will be remembered by God. Right? There is Zikaron through the Teruah, through this blow, through this alarm. Right? It's an alarm, it's a shout. Right? It's a blow that's an alarm and it's a shout. So we see here that the way the Torah is describing it, right? It's kind of like an announcement that has along with it another layer of zikaron, of remembrance. Okay? And that, for me, when you're blowing the shofar, just from the Torah aspect for now, we'll get to the Ketuvim about Rosh Hashanah in a moment, just from the way the Torah describes it, of using this run teruah, a teruah is like an alarming sound, right? We use it for war. We use it to travel. It's more alarming than, let's say, a tikiyah. Yes, Freddie, you have a question. Freddie? So you raised your hand.
It was an accident.
No worries. So that's how I look at it in the Torah. something that's just like a reminder. And actually, the Rambam mentions, very important, I'm sure many of you heard this before, that Rambam mentions that even though the Torah doesn't say why we blow the shofar, he says that it is a reminder of teshuvah. It is a reminder for us to wake up and do teshuvah. But he does mention the Torah does not specify the reason for it. Now, it's very important for us to realize the Torah did not use what yet. What is Rosh Hashanah known as in the Torah so far? Right? What name hasn't been used? Right? We have to realize, and I only really realize this when I'm reading Rabbi Haim David Halevi, when I read his book Mekor Hayim. Rabbi Haim David Halevi was a chief rabbi of Tel Aviv in the late 1900s. He was in the same graduating class as Hacham Avodah Yosef, Rabbi Shelush, Hacham Baruch, among many others. And in it, he gives a progression of how throughout history we see our halakha progressing. He says that it's very important for us to realize that we didn't get to the name of Yom Hadim and Rosh Hashanah yet. The Torah does not use that name. And we have to think about how that name came about. How did we get to this name of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Hadim? How did we get there from Yom Teruah to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Hadim? We have to think about how we got to that point. And before we even get there, we have to see elsewhere in the Tanakh where we see the first day of the seventh month. Many of you may not be familiar with this source. It's a very important source. In the book of Nehemiah, Ezra is taking out the Torah in front of the people to read the Torah to the people. Everybody, Me'ish ve'ad isha, anyone that's coming, they're coming to hear the Torah. He's reading the Torah in front of the people. And this happens on the first day of the seventh month. What happens as the people hear the Torah? They're hearing the Torah. They may not have heard the Torah for a very long time. They may have forgotten a lot of the mitzvot because they were in exile in Bavel for a very long time. So now they're coming back from exile, and the leader and the leaders are reading the Torah. Okay, they're reading the Torah. And now what are the people doing? When I found this source, I want to thank Rabbi Dr. Rani Hasson, who wrote an article about this, about Rosh Hashanah. I just want to thank him for alerting me to this source, because before I read his article about 10 years ago, I never knew about this. And it goes as follows. Nehemiah and Ezra and the Leviim tell the people, Hayom kadosh hu l'Adonai Elohechem. Today is a special day to God. Al tit'abelu ve'al tibku. Don't mourn, don't cry. Ki bochim kol ha'am keshom'am et divrei Torah. The people were crying because they were hurt for their own selves, that they weren't following the words of the Torah. And what do the leaders, what does Ezra and Nehemiah tell the people? Vayomer lahem, lechu ichlu mashmanim, ushtu mamtakim, veshilchu manot le'en nachon lo. Go, eat sweet and choice foods, drink sweet drinks, and send portions to whoever has nothing prepared. Ki kadosh hayom la'adonenu. Today is a special day. Ve'al te'asevu, don't be saddened. Ki hedvat Adonai hi ma'uzechem. Because God is your strength. We see here something special about this first day of the seventh month that we don't know from the Torah. We know that it's a day that's kadosh, but we don't know from the Torah about eating sweets and drinking sweets and sending gifts to others of food, and that God is your strength. Where does this all come from? Seems to be this was how Rosh Hashanah was perceived, it seems, but we'll see later on how this developed into what we do today. A very important source to keep in mind. People were crying, and they told them, don't cry, be happy, don't cry. We have to see how that will work together with what we're going to present next. because many of us know Rosh Hashanah as Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, right? The day that we are judged by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we know it as Rosh Hashanah. So let's see here the other names of the holiday, because I want to tie in all these ideas together to see how they could both work in tandem with Rosh Hashanah. So this idea of Rosh Hashanah being called Rosh Hashanah is actually found in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hem. There are 4 New Years. I'm not going to go through every one, but it's very important to realize that there were 4 different heads of the year, right? Ehad b'Nisan, Ehad b'Elul, Ehad b'Tishri, and Ehad b'Shvat or Tu b'Shvat. There were 4 different heads of the year. When we say Rosh Hashanah in the Mishnah, there were 4 Rosh Hashanah, right? We all know the first day of Nisan, very important day of the year. It's the first day of the first month. Mishkan was set up that day. It's a very important day. So how did our Rosh Hashanah become known as Rosh Hashanah? How did our first day of the 7th month become known as Rosh Hashanah? And I think the answer comes along with the next Mishnah. Look at the next Mishnah. There are 4 times of a year that we are judged. We are judged on Pesach. We're judged on Shavuot. We're judged on Rosh Hashanah. And we're judged on Hag HaSukkot. Look carefully at this Mishnah. This is going to open up a very important key for us to understanding how we got to Yom Hadin and Rosh Hashanah for this holiday. Pesach, we're judged on the grain, right? We know we give the Korban Omer on that holiday. On Shavuot, we're judged for the fruits. It's the holiday of Bikurim. On Sukkot, we're judged for the water. We know that's when we start to pray for the rain. But look how the Mishnah calls the first day of the 7th month. Berosh Hashanah, the Mishnah says, Kol ba'e olam ovrim lefanav kivnei maron, shene'emar hayosed le'achalibam hamevin el chol ma'asehem. Think for a moment. All the other 3 holidays were judged for something. For the Teruah, for the grain, for the perot, and for the mayim. On Rosh Hashanah, first day of the 7th month, it doesn't say what we're judged about. It just says, all the people of the world come in front of Him, which is God, Kivnei Maron, like a division of soldiers. Shene'emar, Hayoser Yahalibam Hamevin Kol Ma'asehem. And I'm going to ask you this question. What are we judged for in Rosh Hashanah? For the other 3, we're judged for something. Here it doesn't say what we're judged for. And I think the Mishnah is saying that the answer is very clear. We're judged for ourselves. We come in front of God and we're judged like sheep. We're judged one by one coming in front of God. It's us that's judged. We are judged, as opposed to on the other 3 times of the year, we're judged for something. Here we're judged for our actions. And I think that's what the next piece, the Gemara, is speaking about. Rabbi Rahman bar Yitzchak Amar Ladin, Kedichtiv, Mereshit Hashana ve'ad Harit Shana. Rabbi Rahman bar Yitzchak in the Gemara says, we are judged for judgment. We come in front of God. It's the first of Tishri for judgment. How do we know that? Because it says, Ma yeh besofa mimai de Tishri u'dichtiv tik'u b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom hagenu. And we know this is in the 7th month because it says in Tehillim, tik'u b'chodesh shofar b'kesel yom hagenu. Blow on the 1st of the month the shofar, b'keseh leyom hagenu. When do we blow the shofar? When is the moon hidden? The moon is hidden when we have a small sliver. That's on the first of the month. And we're speaking here about Rosh Hashanah. Now, what I want to point out with all of these sources, and I want you to realize, is that we have different elements of this holiday, right? We have the shofar. We spoke about teruah. We have this idea of us being judged, but then again, it's the beginning of a new year. The beginning is always something happy, is always something joyous. On the other hand, deen, judgment, is overwhelming. Judgment is awe-inspiring. We have to come in front of God in seriousness. And the question is, how do we balance the two? Right? We know that on the night of Rosh Hashanah, we sit at our tables and we're joyous. We open up and we're eating simanim. We're eating foods that symbolize a sweet year. Right? We open up the song that we say, right? We say we should begin the year and it's berachot. It's the beginning. We're happy, we're joyous. And we're eating these simanim that we know the minhag is to eat the simanim. The Gemara says, Amar Abaye, Hashta de Amart simana miltahi, Yeheragil inish lemechal reshata, Kera berubia karte silka betamre. On Rosh Hashanah, we should be accustomed to be eating the gourd and the leek and the beets. We eat the silka, karte, right? We have the edgem, we have the dates, right? We're eating simanim. And we saw that in the story of Nehemiah, which is important for us to realize that every time we're eating the simanim at the night of Rosh Hashanah, and you think, where do we get this from? We saw that in Nehemiah, that they told the people, go eat sweets and drink sweets. It's a sweet day. But that's one aspect of Rosh Hashanah, right? It's a sweet day, but then it's a day of judgment. It's a day of judgment. We're turning in front of God, and that night, when we're singing on the night of Rosh Hashanah, we're saying, Yereim et yikar'u ladin ki al ken ba'u nichavim. We say that in Hon Tahon. We're coming in front of God, ladin, for judgment. So how are we supposed to do both? How are we supposed to, on the one hand, come in front of God with this, what Nehemiah and Ezra say, don't cry, be happy. On the other hand, to come in front of God for deen, for judgment. And I want you to pay attention here to the following two Pesukim in Tehillim that present the same problem. Right? We say, Ivdu et Adonai be'yir'ah ve'gilu bir'ada. Serve God with awe and tremble in front of him with fright. And then we have the same similar words, Ivdu et Adonai be'simcha bo'u lefanav b'nana. Come in front of God with joy, with joy and gladness and shouts. Look at the word, shouts of joy. How is that? And I can argue that the same problem can present itself with the shofar. On the one hand, the shofar, it's a blast, it's alarming, it makes you jump up. On the other hand, June, like you said before, it reminds us about the kingship of God. And it could be happy and it could be shouts of joy to announce something, to announce the coming of God as a king. So how do we balance the two? How do we do that in Rosh Hashanah? So the first thing to realize is that these are not a contradiction, right? It's important to realize that we can come in front of God be'yir'ah, with awe, with reverence of God, trembling even in front of him with deen, and at the same time being happy. How? How is that possible? So I like to read a Midrash that helped me out with this a little bit. The Midrash goes as follows. It says, Davar aher pana el tefilat ha'ar'ar. Right? It says in Tehillim to turn to the prayer of the people. Let me just open up this pasuk in Tehillim one moment. Very important to read the pasuk inside. In Mizmor Chov Bet, Mizmor 102 in Tehillim. I'd like to read it with the nekudot so that it's read properly. Hold on one moment. Here we go. It says in the pasuk, and then we'll read it in Hebrew English as well. Pasuk says as follows. Sorry, hold on one moment. Here we go. It says, Pana el tefilat ha'ar'ar velo baza el tefilatam. God has turned to the prayer of the destitute and has not spurned their prayer. Tikatev zot ledor aharon ve'am nivra yehallelia. May this be written down for a coming generation, that people yet to be created may praise the Lord. Rabbi Haim David Halevi brings this Midrash, and he brings this part of the Midrash. He says that Rabbi Yishak says, this is for the generations she'en lahem lo navi v'lo kohen v'lo bet hamikdash she'chaper alehem. We don't have this for generations that don't have a navi and not a kohen and not a bet hamikdash to atone for us. Ela od tefillah ahat shenishtayed lahem. What is going to be there for us to connect with God? The one tefillah shehem mitpalelim beRosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim ve'lo tivzeh oto mehem. The tefillot of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim are so special, they're so unique, that's what's left for us, this Midrash says, when we don't have a Navi and a Kohen and Bet HaMikdash. Meaning, and the Midrash continues to see the meaning, Tikatev zot ledor aharon, Rabbanan amre elu hadorot shehen kemetim b'maasehem. Uba'in mitpalelim lefanecha b'Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim ve'ata boreh otan beriyah hadasha. This is like the generation, the people, they're like dead in their actions. We're not coming in front of God and saying that we're great with our actions. But when we come and we pray on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you create out of these people a new creation. They are like a new creation coming in front of you. And so it clicked for me. That the pasuk that says why you shouldn't cry on Rosh Hashanah and why you shouldn't be sad goes as follows. Ki hedvat Adonai hi ma'uzechem. Because God is the source of our strength. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the source of our strength. And so, if we come in front of God on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we come in front of Him with sincerity, we did our preparation in coming up to Rosh Hashanah, we inspected into our actions, we look to be better, and we come in front of God, even those people that didn't remember the Torah and they weren't acting the words of Torah, Ezra and Nehemiah told them, know that if you follow the ways of the Torah, God will accept you. God is your strength and your power. And so when you come and you blow that shofar, on the one hand, inspect your actions. On the other hand, we're anointing God as our king, like June said before. And God as our king, we should be proud and happy that we could turn to God with teshuvah. And if we're sincere and we're honest about how we're going to be when we're in front of Him for the entire year, that is the purpose of the simanim. The simanim, it's not superstitious. It's not I eat this food and now I'm going to have a sweet year because I dipped my apple in the sugar or the honey and now all of a sudden it's a sweet year. No. Rabbi Haim David Halevi points out it's a siman for us of the year that we want to have for ourselves. It's a siman, it's a symbol that when we eat that food, when we have the pomegranate and it's filled of the simanim of the plentiful year, that we want to have a plentiful year. But it's up to us. The ball is in our court. And what Ezra Nehemiah telling the people, God is your strength. He will be your strength. He will take care of you as long as you take care of your part that you need to do when you come in front of God. So that when you step in front of God, yes, you're trembling in awe. Yes, it's Yom Hadin. But you're establishing for yourself how that year is going to be by preparing, by coming in front of God with the proper respect, with the proper awe, and saying, I'm not going to mess this up, God. I'm going to take things seriously, and then you could go home happy and proud and joyous with what you're eating at your tables and with your family. And that's crucial for us to come out with that message of the duality. And I'm going to read from Rabbi David Levi to end this. He says, Bechol halachot ve'adinim, all of the halachot and dinim, ve'minhagim, and all of the customs, tevuim efo, bechotemet hakefilut hazot. They all have this duality of the deen and the seriousness of the deen and the happiness of coming in front of God on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Teruah. Thank you so much for everyone joining. Really, if there's any questions, I'll stay on. If anyone has any questions at all, please unmute yourself, ask. This is a preparation class, so I'd love to anyone who's curious to ask a question. If not, have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Rabbi.